Politically, he was a conservative, he was a farmer, he was pro the Vietnam War, so why did Max Yasgur agree to host the Woodstock Music Festival and even appear and speak to the crowd of 500,000 strong? Hi, this is Andre and welcome to this episode of The Woodstock Years. To help set the scene, we're going back to the early 1960s. President John F. Kennedy sets the mission: man will land on the moon before the end of the 60s decade. But then it's cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin who beats America to the punch and goes up in space in April 1961. A month later, Alan Shepard is the first American in space, and of course in 1969 July it is Neil Armstrong who is the first man to land on the moon. Now, Jimi Hendrix might have been the most popular rock star in terms of record sales, but the most popular person on the planet was Neil Armstrong. His mission on the moon was much easier than his trying to handle all the fame and adulation. It was something that he wasn't very comfortable with at all. And the second most unlikely rock star of 1969 was Mr. Max Yasgur. Max Yasgur's Woodstock journey started back in 1962 at Yasgur's farm. A barn had caught fire in the early hours and every able person had come down to try and help. While the barn sadly did burn down, luckily they did save all the cows that were inside. Though sadly Max Yasgur had his third heart attack. He'd already lost 2 fingers on his right hand due to farming related accidents, but he'd been reminded once again of the frailties of farm life and how fragile everything was. So in 1969, during a heavy rain season, when he was worried about being able to bale hay, it just so happened that Max could do with renting out his farm. He needed Woodstock Ventures as much as Woodstock Ventures needed Max Yasgur. Michael Lang and Max Yasgur quickly agreed a price to rent Yasgur's farm, $75,000. Max would even help out with the many court appearances trying to stop Woodstock from even happening. He did not agree with the hippie lifestyle or what they had to say. He was pro-Vietnam War after all, but he did agree with their rights to say it. Michael promised Max that it would be a crowd of 50,000 people, and the day before he thought it would be 80,000, and then the crowd started. The journey from New York City down to Sullivan County was 1 hour, became an 8 to 9 hour car journey. Cars were bumper to bumper, and very soon it would be a 20-mile car park of abandoned cars down Highway 17B as 500,000 strong would arrive. Max would have 3 angina attacks as he'd come to terms with what was happening. He came very close to declaring it a disaster area, but instead he decided to see it through. They would get through this. After all, they had come to an agreement, and on the whole everything was kind of running smoothly. And then as the next day came through and the performances had started, the unlikeliest rock star was getting ready to address the crowds. Mr. Max Yasgur himself. And was what happened part of the Woodstock effect? Here was Max Yasgur addressing the 500,000 strong, telling them how proud he was that they were enjoying 3 days of peace and music, and in a very jovial way handling all the inconveniences. He even made the peace sign. Here was a pro-Vietnam War guy who seemed to be on their side. Was this the Woodstock effect? 50,000 had seen the Beatles at Shea Stadium in 1965, and 500,000, 10 times that number, had just seen people play at Woodstock. But Max Yasgur's story doesn't end there. After Woodstock, he became the unlikeliest person to reunite some of the hundreds of Woodstock runaways with their parents, going back and forth with letters. His address pretty much becoming like a post office in its own right. And the story doesn't end there, because the Bethel Museum, hosted on the site in 2013, applied for a mass gathering license to hold a concert. Of course, they wouldn't have the same hassles that Max Yasgur and Michael Lang had back in 1969, but they would have to apply for a license to Sullivan County. But this time, that license wouldn't be so hard to get. After all, this time the person who was in charge was Sam Yasgur, Max Yasgur's son. The Woodstock years, counting down to the 50th anniversary of 500,000 Strong.